The catering, the venue deposit, the AV equipment rental, the custom signage with my son's name printed in gold letters 2 inches tall. I paid for all of it. Every single invoice, every wire transfer, every late-night phone call with vendors who needed confirmation that yes, the funds would clear. Yes, the event would happen. Yes, someone responsible was behind this. I did not ask for a thank you card. I did not ask for a speech. I did not even ask for a seat at the front table. I just wanted to be there. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, designing bridges in places most people never visit, structures that hold weight quietly and without complaint. I retired 4 years ago with enough savings to be comfortable, enough gray hair to be taken seriously, and enough silence in my house to hear every creak in the floorboards where my son used to run as a boy. Mi son's name is Daniel. Daniel is 34 years old. He is sharp, ambitious, and can talk his way into or out of almost any room. He got that from his mother. She passed when he was 19, and after that it was just the two of us, figuring out what the next version of our family looked like. We figured it out. Or, I thought we had. 3 years ago, Daniel came to me with a business plan. He wanted to launch a consulting firm operations strategy for mid-size manufacturing companies. He had the contacts, he said. He had the reputation, he said. What he needed was capital to cover the first 18 months before revenue stabilized. I read the plan twice. I asked questions. I pushed back on the projections, the way I would have pushed back on load calculations when I was still working. He had answers for most of them. His energy was real. His belief in himself was real. And I remembered what it felt like to be 34 and certain. I gave him $340,000. Not a loan on paper, though we agreed verbally that he would pay me back once the firm was profitable. There was no contract. There was no lawyer. There was just my son sitting across from me at my kitchen table, and the two of us shaking hands the way men in our family had always sealed things that mattered. I want you to understand something. I am not a man who gives money and then hovers. I did not call every week to check on revenue numbers. I did not show up at his office unannounced. I trusted him, and I let that trust breathe. I found out later that this was a mistake not because trust itself was wrong, but because I extended it without paying attention to who he was becoming. The firm grew. Not explosively, but steadily. By the end of year 2, Daniel had 6 employees and 3 anchor clients. He moved into a better office space downtown. He bought a car I recognized from advertisements. He started traveling to conferences I heard about only after he returned. We still talked, but differently. The calls got shorter. His questions about my life became thinner, more perfunctory. He would ask how I was doing the way someone checks a box quickly, without waiting for the real answer. I told myself this was normal. He was busy. Building something takes focus. I had been the same way during the years I was deep in my career. I told myself a lot of things during that time. 8 months ago, Daniel called me to say the firm was planning a major launch event. Not a launch for the company itself that had already happened quietly, but a formal public unveiling. A celebration of reaching a milestone. 50 clients, a new office on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district, and a strategic partnership with a larger consulting group called Meridian Advisory Partners. He told me the date. He told me the venue. He did not send me an invitation, but I assumed that was because I was family. Family does not need a formal piece of cardstock with an envelope. I put the date in my phone calendar, and I bought a new suit. The morning of the event, I drove 2 hours to the city. I had offered to arrive early and help with setup the way I always had when Daniel needed something moved or organized, but he told me that was handled. So I found a parking garage 4 blocks from the venue and walked slowly, the way a man walks when he has nowhere urgent to be, and he is trying to enjoy the feeling of being present for something his child built. The venue was a converted warehouse space, the kind that gets rented for exactly these occasions: exposed brick, industrial lights softened with warm amber filters, long tables with white linen. Through the glass doors I could see staff arranging centerpieces. I could see the stage at the far end, a podium, a backdrop printed with the firm's logo. I had never seen the logo in person before. It looked professional. I felt something move in my chest, something quiet and proud. There was a check-in table outside the main entrance. A young woman with a tablet looked up when I approached. I told her my name. She scrolled. She scrolled again. She looked up at me with the expression people use when they are about to say something they wish they did not have to say. My name was not on the list. I told her I was Daniel's father. I said it the way you say something that should make the next thing obvious. She smiled carefully and asked me to wait while she checked with the event coordinator. I stood to the side. People I did not know walked past me and were waved through without a pause. Men in suits who had been clients for a year. Women who worked for Meridian Advisory. Journalists with press badges. A photographer with 2 cameras around his neck. I stood there for 11 minutes. I counted because I had nothing else to do. The event coordinator came out. She was professional and genuinely uncomfortable, which I respected. She told me that this was a ticketed event, that the guest list had been finalized 2 weeks prior, and that she had not been able to reach Daniel to confirm my admission. She was sorry for the confusion. I asked her to try again. She stepped away with her phone. I watched through the glass. The room was filling. Somewhere inside, my son was about to stand at a podium and talk about what he had built. I tried not to think too hard about the feeling that was beginning to form in the middle of my rib cage. The coordinator came back. Her expression had changed in a way I understood immediately. The way you understand a structural flaw when you see it not with surprise, but with a slow, sinking recognition. Daniel had told her I was not on the list. He had confirmed it deliberately. She said she was very sorry. She said it twice. I thanked her. I turned around. I walked back toward the parking garage, and I kept my pace even and unhurried because I am 63 years old. And I have learned that how you carry yourself in the moments when everything is falling apart is the only thing you can actually control. I sat in my car for a long time. I want to tell you I was angry. Anger would have been clean. Anger has edges you can press against and feel where you are. What I felt was more like being dissolved, like a substance that holds its shape and then very suddenly does not. I thought about the kitchen table, the handshake, $340,000, and the look on Daniel's face when I said yes, that look that I had replayed so many times because it seemed, in that moment, like the look of a son who loved his father. I thought about whether I had imagined it. Here is the thing I did not do. I did not call him. Not that night. Not the next morning. I have enough years in me to know that the conversations worth having are not the ones you have while the wound is still open. You wait. You think clearly. You figure out what is actually true before you say a word. What was actually true took me about 3 weeks to piece together fully. I have a longtime friend named Warren, who works in commercial real estate and knows more people in this city than he probably should. I asked Warren to make some careful, quiet inquiries, not to dig dirt, not to build a case, just to help me understand what my son had built and who was standing next to him. What Warren found was this. Daniel had told the investors from Meridian Advisory Partners that the startup capital for his firm had come from a private angel investor who wished to remain unnamed. He had described this investor as a former colleague with deep industry connections. He had allowed people to believe that this investor held a minority equity stake in the firm in exchange for the funding. There was no equity stake. There was no angel investor with industry connections. There was me, a retired civil engineer, his father, sitting at a kitchen table with a handshake and no paperwork. Daniel had rewritten the origin story of his own company to make it more impressive, more polished, more the kind of story that sophisticated partners respond to. And somewhere along the way, erasing me had become part of making that story work. I drove back to the city 2 days after Warren told me all of this. I did not call ahead. Daniel's office was on the 14th floor. The receptionist recognized me from a photo on his desk, or at least I assumed. That was why she smiled warmly and waved me back without asking who I was. Small mercies. His office had a glass wall. I could see him before he saw me. He was on the phone, leaning back, one foot resting on the edge of his desk. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who had gotten away with something and had begun to forget that he had ever needed to get away with it. He saw me. His foot came off the desk. He ended the call. I sat down across from him without being invited to, and I looked at him for a moment before I said anything. I wanted him to feel the full weight of the silence. I have found that silence, used correctly, communicates things that words dilute. Then I asked him one question. I asked him who paid for this. He knew exactly what I meant. He did not pretend otherwise. which I will say is something. A man who lies strategically is more dangerous than one who lies reflexively, but he is also occasionally capable of a kind of honesty when the pretending is no longer worth the energy. He told me it was complicated. He told me that the narrative around the firm's founding mattered for credibility, and that having a father as your sole backer read as a liability in rooms where institutional credibility was the currency. He told me he had always planned to make it right once the firm was established. I asked him what making it right looked like in his mind. He did not have an answer. I left without raising my voice. I drove home. I sat in my kitchen, in the same chair where we had shaken hands 3 years ago, and I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said to me in this moment, not about Daniel, but about me, about whether I had seen the signs and chosen not to look. And I will be honest with you, because this is the part that nobody tells you when they talk about ungrateful children. I had seen signs. Not of this, not exactly, but I had seen moments when Daniel chose convenience over honesty, and I had explained it away. I had seen moments when he positioned himself in a story without room for anyone else, and I had called it ambition. I had loved him in a way that sometimes looked like not paying attention. That is on me. I carry that. I do not put it down. But carrying your part of something does not mean accepting someone else's part as yours too. There is a lawyer in my city named Patricia. I have known her for 15 years. She is precise and direct, and does not believe in wasting a client's time on sentiment. I called her the morning after I sat in my kitchen and thought about my wife. I told Patricia everything. I told her about the $340,000, the verbal agreement, the absence of paperwork, and the specific misrepresentations Daniel had made to Meridian Advisory about the source and structure of his startup capital. I told her about the event. I told her about standing outside a glass door while my son confirmed to a coordinator that I was not on the list. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gerald, I need you to understand something. The verbal agreement is recoverable, but that's not your most important leverage here. The misrepresentation to Meridian that's theirs, that's a problem between your son and his partners, and you may not want to be the one who pulls that thread." I told her I understood. I told her I wanted to pull it anyway. Patricia sent a formal demand letter to Daniel's firm, citing the verbal loan agreement, the absence of any equity transfer, and requesting full repayment of the $340,000 within 30 days. She copied, with careful legal precision, the primary contact at Meridian Advisory Partners, noting that certain representations made during their partnership negotiations might require independent verification. The letter went out on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Daniel had called me 4 times. I did not answer. By Friday morning, he was at my front door. I watched his car pull into my driveway through the kitchen window. I had known he would come. I put the kettle on, because whatever was about to happen, I wanted to be the one who was calm. He knocked. I let him knock twice before I opened the door. He was not the version of himself I had seen leaning back in his office chair. He looked younger, somehow. He looked like the boy who used to come to me when something had gone wrong at school, and he didn't know how to fix it. That particular combination of guilt and fear that a child's face makes when it has not yet learned to hide the contents. I let him in. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I sat down. He sat down. He started with an apology. I listened to it fully, without interrupting. It was a real apology. I want to be fair about that. He was not negotiating. He was not framing. He told me that he had been so consumed with how the story of his company looked from the outside that he had stopped thinking about what it actually was on the inside. He told me that excluding me from the event was the worst thing he had ever done, and that he knew it the moment he confirmed my name was not on the list, and then watched the coordinator walk back outside and understood what he had set in motion. He said he had told himself that he would fix it after the partnership was signed, that once the firm was bigger and more secure, he would find a way to acknowledge what I had contributed, to bring me back into the story properly. I asked him how long after was supposed to take. He didn't answer. I told him something then. I want to tell it to you the same way I told it to him, plainly and without theater. I told him that I did not raise him to erase people who love him in order to look more impressive to people who do not. I told him that a business built on a false foundation is not a business. It is a performance, and performances end. I told him that I was not angry with him for needing money, or for being ambitious, or for wanting to be seen as someone who had built something real. I told him I was his father. I had wanted all of those things for him. What I could not forgive, not easily, was the decision to look me in the eye 3 years ago and shake my hand as a man, and then spend those 3 years removing me from the record of his own life. That was not ambition. That was erasure, and I was not willing to be erased. Daniel was quiet for a long time after I stopped talking. Then he said something that I did not expect. He said, "You're right that you didn't raise me to do this. But somewhere along the way, I started to believe that the only thing you were proud of was the money. That the $300,000 was what you were really offering, not yourself." I sat with that. I sat with it for a long time, because the honest thing, the thing I owe you, and owe myself, is that it landed somewhere real. I have not always been an emotionally available man. I am a civil engineer. I was raised by a man who showed love through provision and action, and I passed that forward without questioning it. I had written a check and called it presents. We had both made mistakes. His were larger, but mine had made room for his. That conversation in my kitchen lasted almost 2 hours. We did not resolve everything. Some things do not resolve in a single morning over coffee. But something shifted not back to what it had been, because you cannot return to a place after you have seen what was underneath it. Something shifted forward, into honesty, into the discomfort of two people agreeing to look at each other clearly for the first time in years. The Meridian partnership was delayed. Their legal team requested a full audit of the firm's capitalization history. Once Patricia's letter raised questions, it took 6 weeks and cost Daniel a revised partnership structure that gave him less favorable terms than the original agreement. He did not lose the partnership entirely, but he lost the position of power within it. He called to tell me about the revised terms, not to blame me, or at least not primarily to blame me, mostly to say that he understood why it happened and that he was not going to pretend otherwise. I told him that I hoped the new terms were still workable. He said they were. He said they were actually more honest in their structure than the original agreement had been, because the original had been built on a story that wasn't true, and a foundation like that always costs more to maintain than it looks like from the outside. He sounded, for the first time in a long time, like a man telling me something real. Patricia structured the repayment over 4 years, interest-free. The first payment arrived on the 1st of the following month, exactly on schedule. It was not the money I cared about. The money was always secondary. What I cared about was that the agreement was real, this time written down, witnessed, a record that said, "This happened. This was between us." It was true. I want to tell you what I did the evening after Daniel left my kitchen that morning. I drove out to a bridge I had worked on 22 years ago. A small one, nothing famous, a state highway crossing over a tributary about 40 miles outside of the city. I had done the load calculations myself. I remembered arguing with the project manager about the specifications for the support columns. I had been right, and we had done it my way, and the bridge had been standing without incident for over 2 decades. I parked and got out and stood on the pedestrian walkway for a while, watching the water move. People talk about building things as though the value is in the thing that gets built, but a bridge holds weight. That is what it is for. It is not beautiful for its own sake. It is beautiful because it carries something from one place to another, reliably, across something that would otherwise stop you. I had tried to be that for my son. Imperfectly, incompletely, with gaps and blind spots and moments where I had confused the funding with the love. But I had been there. I had held weight. He had made the mistake that people make when something is reliable. He had started to treat it like scenery, like something that had always been there and would always be there, and therefore did not need to be acknowledged or maintained or seen. What I had done, by walking away from that venue, by sitting in my car and then calling Patricia, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. I have heard the word revenge used for stories like mine, and it is the wrong word. Revenge is about hurting someone because they hurt you. What I did was simpler and less dramatic. I refused to continue supporting a version of events that did not include me. That is not revenge. That is just truth. There is a moment in every structure, every bridge, every load-bearing system where you test whether what you have built will hold. You do not test it gently. You apply weight. You apply more weight than you expect it to carry. If it holds, you know what you have. If it does not hold, you know that too. and you know it before someone gets hurt. My son and I are testing whether what we have can hold the weight of what happened. I do not know yet. I am 63 years old, and I have lived long enough to stop predicting the things I cannot control. I call him on Sunday evenings now. The calls are shorter than I would like, but they are more honest than they used to be. He asks how I am doing and he waits for the actual answer. I asked him recently whether he ever went back and looked at the video from the launch event. He had hired a videographer, and the full recording had been edited and posted online. He said he had watched parts of it. I asked if there was a moment, watching it, where something felt wrong. He was quiet. Then he said yes. He said there was a section where the MC was listing the people who had made the firm possible, and he had written the script himself, and he had put in Warren Buffett quotes and industry mentors and the names of his first 3 clients. He said watching it back, he had felt the absence in it not as guilt, exactly, but as a kind of hollow sound, the way a wall sounds different when you knock on the part that has nothing behind it. I told him I knew exactly the sound he meant. He said, "I should have put you in the speech, Dad." I told him he still could. Not at an event, not on a stage, just here, between the two of us, in real time. He could tell me now what he would have said if he had told the truth from the beginning. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I would have said that I grew up watching a man hold things together quietly, without asking for recognition, and that when I decided to do something hard and uncertain, the first person I went to was him, and that he said yes before I finished the sentence." I was quiet for a moment after that. I looked out the window of my kitchen at the backyard, where the oak tree my wife planted the year Daniel was born was dropping leaves in the late afternoon light. "That would have been a good speech," I said. He said, "I know." I poured the last of my coffee. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. The oak tree moved in a way that looked, for a second, like it was breathing. There are things I still have not forgiven. I am working on them. I do not think forgiveness is an event. I think it is a practice. Something you return to, the way you return to a structure you are responsible for, checking the joints, checking the load, making sure nothing has shifted overnight in a way you didn't notice. I go back to that bridge sometimes, when I need to think. It is still standing. That is the only thing I ever really wanted for what I built to still be standing, long after the work was finished and I was gone. I think, some days, that my son and I might still be standing too. I start the engine. I drive home,